When my husband of 13 years announced that my sister was carrying his triplets after our long, agonizing battle with infertility, I didn't scream or tear down our home. I'm Annette Sterling, 37, a title clerk from a quiet Ohio river town, and I'm about to show you how a quiet woman dismantles a betrayal built on her own silent sacrifices. Let me tell you something about silence. When you spend over a decade trying to coax life into a quiet house, you learn to live with a very specific kind of hush. It's the silence of holding your breath while waiting for a digital readout on a plastic stick. It's the silence of a husband turning his back to you in bed, his heavy sigh cutting deeper than any insult, because once again, your body has failed the both of you. For 13 years, I carried that silence like a stone in my chest. I blamed myself. I let my mother-in-law Evelyn look at me across her polished dining table and talk about family legacy as if I were a dry well in a fertile valley. I am a title clerk. My daily life is spent in the basement of the Washington County Courthouse, digging through yellowed land deeds, tax liens, and property transfers. I know how to trace ownership. I know how to find the hidden cracks in a foundation that the buyer can't see. I know that on paper, every mistake eventually leaves a paper trail, and every debt must be paid. But when it came to my own life, I kept my eyes closed because I wanted so badly to be a mother, and I wanted so badly to keep the family I had left. My younger sister, Chloe, was 10 years younger than me. I practically raised her after our mother passed away in a damped, rented house when Chloe was just 8. I was the one who worked 2 jobs so she could have a prom dress. I was the one who paid off her credit cards when she decided she wanted to be a makeup artist in Columbus, only to come crawling back home 6 months later with empty pockets and a trail of broken promises. When she knocked on our door half a year ago, crying that she had nowhere else to go, I didn't hesitate. I opened my arms. I washed her clothes, made her favorite chicken pot pie, and gave her our guest room, the room I had painted a soft, hopeful yellow 10 years prior. Back when I still believed a crib would go in there. If you have ever opened your home to someone you loved, only to have them quietly, systematically dismantle your life from the inside, you know the sickness that settles in your stomach when you look back at the clues you missed. I missed the way Garrett, my husband, suddenly stopped complaining about the clutter in the hallway. I missed the way he stayed home on Saturday mornings instead of going to the hardware store, offering instead to help Chloe carry her heavy boxers of cosmetics down to the basement. I missed the way Chloe started wearing my old, oversized knit cardigans, the ones that smelled of my lavender detergent, wrapping them around herself like a shield. I was too busy working overtime at the county office, trying to pay off the final round of IVF treatments that had left my bank account empty and my spirit bruised. The truth didn't come out in a dramatic, tear-filled confession. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, the kind of damp, gray Ohio day where the moisture clings to your skin and makes your bones ache. I came home from the courthouse, my boots squeaking on the linoleum of our small kitchen. The house was too quiet, but it was a heavy, expectant quiet. When I walked into the dining room, I saw them. They were sitting at the oval oak table, the one my grandfather built with his own hands, the one I had sanded down and varnished until my fingers bled. Garrett was there, staring down at his hands. His mother, Evelyn, sat next to him, her posture rigid, her fingers wrapped around one of my chipped ceramic mugs. And there was Chloe, sitting on the edge of her chair, her face pale, her hands resting flat against her stomach. "Annette," Evelyn said, her voice carrying that sharp, military precision she used when she wanted to command a room. "Sit down. We need to have a mature conversation." I didn't sit. I stood by the doorway, still holding my worn leather work bag, the smell of damp paper and old rain clinging to my coat. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice flat, calmer than I actually felt. Garrett wouldn't look at me. He looked at the salt shaker. "Annette, we didn't want it to happen this way," he mumbled, his voice thick with a cowardice that made my stomach turn. "But life finds a way, even when we try to force it." "What is he talking about, Chloe?" I asked, looking directly at my sister. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, and a single theatrical tear rolled down her cheek. "I'm pregnant, Annie," she whispered, using the childhood nickname she knew usually softened my heart. And it's Garrett's. The doctor says it's triplets." 3 of them. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the rhythmic asterisk drip dash drip asterisk of the kitchen faucet that Garrett had promised to fix 3 months ago. I looked at my sister's stomach. Triplets. For 13 years, I had prayed for just one. I had endured hundreds of hormone injections that left my thighs black and blue. I had spent nights weeping on the bathroom floor, counting the cost of every failed cycle, while Garrett grew more distant, more cold, more convinced that my body was a broken vessel. And here was my sister, 27 years old, carrying 3 of his children after 6 months of living under my roof, eating my food and sleeping in the room I had painted yellow for my own unborn child. It's a miracle! Really? Evelyn chimed in, her voice devoid of any real sympathy for me. A sign from above. Garrett deserves to have his own flesh and blood. Annette, you've had 13 years. We've all been very patient, but a man has a right to his legacy. We have to think about the children now. Asterisk the children. Asterisk the word felt like a physical blow to my chest. I looked at Garrett, the man I had loved since I was 24, the man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health. He was 39 now. His hair thinning at the temples, a softness around his middle that hadn't been there when we married. He looked so small sitting there, flanked by his mother and his pregnant mistress, unable to even meet the eyes of the woman who had worked 50-hour weeks to pay off his truck loan. We need to be practical, Evelyn continued, taking a sip from my mug. Chloe needs a stable environment. The stress of a high-risk pregnancy with triplets is immense. Garrett needs to be here to take care of her. We think it's best if you sign the house over to Garrett and move into a smaller apartment. After all, you only need space for one. It's only fair. I stood there, feeling the cold air from the hallway draft hitting the back of my neck. They had it all figured out. They had sat in my house, at my grandfather's table, and decided how to carve up my life like a Sunday roast. They expected me to cry. They expected me to scream, to throw things, to play the part of the hysterical, barren wife so they could feel justified in their betrayal. They wanted me to be the villain so they could be the victims of a tragic, beautiful love story. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked at my sister, who was watching me through her eyelashes, trying to gauge my reaction. I looked at my husband, who was still staring at the table, his shoulders slumped in a pathetic display of guilt. And then I looked at Evelyn, who had a smug, triumphant little smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I see, I said quietly. I set my leather bag down on the sideboard. I took off my coat and hung it on the peg by the door, smoothing out the fabric with deliberate care. Annette? Annette. Garrett finally looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. He had expected a storm, and instead, he was getting a calm, flat lake. Are you okay? I am fine, Garrett, I said, walking over to the table. I stood right behind Chloe's chair. She flinched slightly, but I didn't touch her. I just looked down at her head, seeing the dark roots of her hair showing through her cheap blonde dye. If you want a divorce, you can have one. I won't stand in the way of your legacy. Evelyn let out a breath she seemed to have been holding, her shoulders relaxing. Well, I'm glad you're being sensible, Annette. It's for the best. Yes, I agreed, my voice as cold and clear as winter water. It is definitely for the best. I looked at the 3 of them sitting there, completely unaware of the legal reality of the ground they were standing on. They saw a defeated woman. They saw a title clerk who spent her days in a dark basement with old papers. They didn't realize that when you spend your life studying the fine print, you learn exactly how to pull the rug out from under someone so gently, they don't even realize they're falling until they hit the floor. I'll have my attorney draw up the papers, I said, my voice steady. I'll sign them quietly. No fuss, no drama. Garrett looked almost relieved, a weak, cowardly smile touching his lips. Thank you, Annette. I appreciate you being so mature about this. I didn't answer him. I just walked upstairs to our bedroom, closed the door, and sat down on the edge of the bed. The silence of the house rushed back in, but for the first time in 13 years, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like the quiet before the first strike of lightning in a summer storm. I didn't pack everything that night. I didn't have the energy to carry 13 years of my life down the creaking wooden stairs while my sister sat in my living room, carrying the children I had spent a decade praying for. I took only what would fit into 3 cardboard banana boxers I'd salvaged from the grocery store down the street, along with my grandfather's hand-stitched patchwork quilt and my work clothes. When I walked out the front door, Garrett didn't even stand up to help me load the boxers into the trunk of my rusty sedan. He just sat on the sofa, his arm wrapped protectively around Chloe's shoulders, his face a mask of awkward, guilty relief. He thought he had won. He thought my silence was the white flag of a defeated, barren woman who was finally clearing the way for his real family. I drove through the damp Ohio mist to Clara's house. Clara was 70, a retired senior escrow officer who had spent 40 years working at the county title office before I ever sat at my desk there. She was the closest thing I had to a mother since mine passed away. And her small, blue-painted cottage on the edge of town always smelled of cinnamon, dried lavender, and the damp, comforting scent of old books. When I knocked on her door, she didn't ask questions. She just looked at my pale face, looked at the cardboard boxers in my back seat, and opened her arms. I pressed my face into her shoulder, smelling the familiar, warm scent of her wool cardigan. And for the first time since my sister had announced her pregnancy, I let myself weep. I cried for the babies I would never hold, for the 13 years I had wasted scrubbing Garrett's grass-stained work pants, and for the sheer, suffocating weight of the betrayal. "Let it out, Annie," Clara whispered, rubbing my back with her gnarled, arthritic hands. "You cry until you can't cry anymore, and then, tomorrow, we get to work." If you have ever sat at a kitchen table in the dead of night, clutching a mug of lukewarm chamomile tea while your entire world lay in ruins around you, you know the absolute stillness that comes after the tears run dry. It's a quiet, cold clarity. You realize that no one is coming to save you. You realize that the people who promised to love you have spent months, perhaps years, quietly calculating how to take everything you have left. And that is the moment you have to decide. Do you let them erase you? Or do you use the very tools they gave you to build a fortress they can't tear down? The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the Ohio River looking like a sheet of hammered pewter. I walked into the basement of the Washington County Courthouse at 7:30, a full hour before the doors officially opened to the public. The basement was my sanctuary. It was a labyrinth of towering steel shelves, loaded with heavy canvas binders and faded green ledger folders containing the history of every plot of land, every debt, and every broken promise in the county. Clara met me by the microfiche machines, her eyes sharp behind her reading glasses. She had a thick manila folder in her hands. "I did some digging in the digital registry last night after you went to sleep," Clara said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial murmur. "Evelyn and Garrett have been busy, Annie. Busier than you think." I took the folder from her. My fingers were cold as I opened it, revealing the property records for 142 Riverview Lane, the house my grandfather had built with his own hands. The house where Garrett and Chloe were currently sleeping in my bed. As a title clerk, I know how to read between the lines of a property deed the way a doctor reads an X-ray. I saw it immediately. 3 months ago, a quitclaim deed had been prepared, purporting to transfer the sole ownership of the property from Annette Sterling, a married woman, to Garrett Sterling and Chloe Sterling as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. My breath caught in my throat. "They tried to transfer the deed?" "They didn't just try," Clara said, pointing a manicured finger at the bottom of the page. "They attempted to file it. But look at the notary stamp. It's a mobile notary from Columbus. And look at the signature on the line marked Annette Sterling." I stared at the looping, elegant, cursive. It looked like my handwriting. It was a very good imitation. But I had never signed that paper. I had never met a mobile notary from Columbus. Garrett had forged my signature. He had sat at our kitchen table, perhaps while I was at work or sleeping, and carefully traced my name to steal the only real asset I had left in this world. "Why didn't it go through?" I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Because they're idiots," Clara said flatly, a grim smile touching her lips. "They didn't realize your grandfather's will had a very specific restrictive covenant. The property was left to you in a spendthrift trust until you turned 38. You don't turn 38 for another 3 weeks, Annie. Until then, the property cannot be transferred, sold, or encumbered without the express, written consent of the trust executor, which is me. The county recorder caught the trust restriction and put the filing on hold in the pending queue. Waiting for administrative clarification, I closed my eyes, a wave of profound, sickening relief washing over me. My grandfather had known Garrett's family was greedy, and he had put a lock on my inheritance that only turned 38 years after my birth. But that's not all, Clara continued, pulling out a second set of documents. I looked into Evelyn's finances, too. You know that big, beautiful Victorian house she lives in? The one she uses to lord her status over everyone in town. What about it? Primera ask it. She mortgaged it to the hilt 2 years ago to fund Garrett's landscaping business, Clara explained, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a seasoned investigator. Garrett's business is drowning in debt, Annie. He owes over $80,000 to equipment suppliers, and his tax liens are piling up. Evelyn co-signed all of his business lines of credit. If those loans default, the bank is going to foreclose on Evelyn's Victorian house. They desperately need your grandfather's house. They need to clear the title, sell it, and use the equity to pay off Garrett's debts before the bank takes Evelyn's home. I stood there in the quiet, dusty basement, the smell of old paper and ink filling my lungs. The puzzle pieces fell into place with a terrifying, beautiful precision. Evelyn hadn't welcomed my sister's pregnancy out of some pure, high-minded desire for a family legacy. She had welcomed it because she saw it as the perfect lever to pry me out of the house. They expected me to be so devastated, so broken by the betrayal and the triplets, that I would simply sign whatever divorce papers they put in front of me just to make the pain stop. They thought I would walk away, leaving them with a clean title to a house they could sell for $250,000 to save their own skin. They thought my silence was weakness. They didn't realize it was space I was using to build a trap of their own design. If I report the forgery now, Primera Said slowly Gareth goes to jail. The house remains mine, but the divorce will turn into a massive, public war. They'll play the victims. Evelyn will claim it was a misunderstanding, and Chloe will cry to the local newspapers about her high-risk pregnancy. Clara leaned in close, her eyes narrowing. Exactly! And if he's in jail, he has no income, and you'll be tied up in litigation for years trying to untangle the mess. What do you want to do, Annie? I looked down at the forged quitclaim deed. I felt the phantom pain of those hundreds of needles I had stuck into my own skin, trying to give Garrett the children he so desperately wanted, while he was already planning my financial ruin with my own sister. I'm going to sign the divorce papers, I said, my voice steady, devoid of any anger. I'm going to give them exactly what they asked for, but I'm going to draft the agreement myself. I spent the next 3 hours sitting at my desk, utilizing the county's legal database to draft a custom marital settlement agreement. I didn't use a fancy attorney. I didn't need one. One knew the local property and divorce statutes better than most general practice lawyers in the county. I drafted a quiet, clean In the agreement, I stated that I would waive all claims to Garrett's landscaping business, his trucks, and his personal savings. In exchange, Garrett would waive all claims to my grandfather's house, acknowledging it as my sole, non-marital inherited property. But I added one small, technical clause, a standard hold harmless, an indemnification provision, buried deep in page 12 under the standard boilerplate language about debt division. It stated that Garrett would assume sole responsibility for all marital debts incurred during the marriage, specifically including any outstanding medical debts, personal loans, and any undisclosed liabilities or encumbrances associated with any family properties. To a layman, it looked like standard legal jargon, but to a title clerk, it was a ticking time bomb. By signing that paper, Garrett was legally agreeing to indemnify me against any financial fallout from his fraudulent activities, including the attempted refinance and any private loans his mother had advanced him using the house as imaginary collateral. I printed the document on standard white legal paper. I placed it inside a faded green ledger folder, the same kind we used for closed land disputes. "Are you ready for this?" Clara asked, watching me slide the folder into my bag. "I've been ready for 13 years. Clara," I said. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, cold afternoon sun. I felt lighter than I had in a decade. The shame of my barrenness, the guilt of not being enough, the heavy, dark cloud of my sister's betrayal, it all seemed to evaporate, replaced by the cool, hard reality of the law. They had built their new life on a foundation of sand and stolen promises. I was simply about to hand them the shovel so they could finish digging their own graves. I called Garrett on Thursday morning from the quiet of the courthouse basement, using the landline on my desk. I didn't want to call him from my cell phone. I wanted the distance of a professional line. When he answered, his voice was thick with sleep and irritation. The sound of a man who hadn't had to wake up early for hard work in a very long time. "Annette?" he asked, sounding surprised. "I didn't think you'd call so soon. Are you ready to talk about the house?" "I'm ready to sign, Gara," I said, keeping my voice level, completely devoid of the trembling that was happening in my chest. "I have the dissolution papers ready. I drafted them myself to save us the legal fees. I'll bring them over this evening. Have your mother there, Anne, Chloe, and Chloe. We should all be present to make sure everything is clear." "Oh, okay," he stammered, and I could hear the immediate, greedy relief washing through the receiver. He thought I was rolling over. He thought the quiet woman from the title office had finally been broken by the weight of 3 unborn babies. "Yeah, that's great, Annie. We'll be here. Thank you for being so reasonable." Razonable. It's a word people use when they want you to accept their abuse without making a scene. If you have ever had to smile at the person who tore your heart out just to make sure they don't see the trap you've laid, you know how much energy it takes to keep your hands from shaking. You have to swallow your own blood, mask your own grief, and pretend that you are completely, utterly defeated. I spent the rest of my workday doing just that. I double-checked the formatting of the settlement agreement. I made sure Mira, a licensed notary from the county probate office who had known my grandfather for 30 years, was willing to come with me. Mira was a woman of few words, with eyes like steel and a quiet respect for the law. She knew what Garrett had done, not because I told her, but because in a small town, the courthouse basement hears everything. At 6 o'clock, the rain began to fall again, a steady, rhythmic drumming against the windshield of my car as I drove back to 142 Riverview Lane. Mira sat in the passenger seat, her leather notary seal resting in her lap, like a weapon. When I unlocked the front door of my own house, the first thing that hit me was the smell. It didn't smell like my lavender detergent or the lemon wax I used on the floors anymore. It smelled of fried food, cheap vanilla body spray, and the heavy, damp scent of clutter. I walked into the living room, and my heart took a hard, painful bounce against my ribs. My grandmother's hand-painted porcelain vase, the one that had sat on the mantelpiece for 50 years, was gone. In its place sat a row of plastic baby bottles and a stack of parenting magazines. On the refrigerator, my framed wedding photos had been taken down. In its place, stuck with a cheap butterfly magnet, was a grainy, black and white ultrasound picture showing 3 tiny, indistinct, gray shapes. Chloe was sitting on the sofa, her feet propped up on my favorite knitted footstool. She was wearing one of my oversized cardigans, her hands resting smugly on her stomach, which was barely showing yet, but she held herself as if she were carrying the crown jewels. "Annie," Chloe said, her voice dripping with a sugary, performance-grade sympathy that made my skin crawl. "I hope you aren't mad. The doctor said I need to keep my feet up. High risk, you know. Triplets take a lot out of a girl." "I'm not mad, Chloe," I said quietly, setting my green ledger folder down on the oak dining table. "I'm here to finish this." Evelyn emerged from the kitchen, holding a tray of tea. She had her best patronizing hostess smile plastered on her face, but her eyes immediately locked onto the green folder in my hands. Garrett followed behind her, looking nervous but eager, his eyes darting between me and Mira, who stood silently by the door like a sentinel. "Annette, dear," Evelyn said, setting the tray down with a sharp clink. "And Mira, how nice of you to come. We're so glad we can settle this like mature adults. There's no need for lawyers to get rich off of a family transition, is there?" "No," I agreed, sitting down at the table. "No need at all." I opened the folder. I pulled out 3 copies of the marital settlement agreement. I didn't look at Garrett. I didn't look at my sister. I kept my eyes on the white paper, on the clean, black ink that represented the absolute end of my 13-year marriage. This is a standard dissolution agreement, I explained, my voice carrying the calm, rhythmic cadence of my professional life. It states that we are dissolving the marriage due to irreconcilable differences. Under the terms, I am waiving any and all claims to Garrett's landscaping business, his commercial equipment, his personal bank accounts, and his future earnings. Garrett's eyes lit up. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. And the house? You're signing the house over, right? Like we talked about. Yes, I lied. My voice steady. The agreement addresses the real property at 142 Riverview Lane. On page 8, it states that we both agreed to waive any marital claims to our respective inherited properties. It specifically identifies 142 Riverview Lane as my sole, non-marital inherited property and states that Garrett waives any and all current, past, or future claims of ownership, equity, or residency in the property. Evelyn's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She frowned, her sharp eyes scanning my face. Wait. If you keep the house, Annette, where are Garrett and Chloe supposed to live? We agreed they need this house for the babies. Oh, Garrett will have plenty of resources once the business is sorted, I said smoothly, looking directly at my husband. And besides, Garrett, you've already taken care of the property transfer, haven't you? You filed that quitclaim deed 3 months ago. This agreement simply formalizes the division of our other assets and ensures that we don't sue each other later. Garrett went pale, his eyes widening in sudden panic. He looked at his mother, Ten Bay. He didn't know that I knew about the forged quitclaim deed. He thought he had successfully slipped it into the county registry without my knowledge. He thought that by signing this agreement, he was just letting me think I had a say, while in reality, he believed he already owned the house. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Right, Ray? The property is handled. This is just to make the divorce clean, to waive the business, debt, and all that? Exactly, I said, turning to page 12. And to make sure everything is completely fair, I've included a standard indemnification clause. It's right here, under section 14, hold harmless. It states that you, Garrett, assume sole responsibility for all liabilities, debts, loans, and encumbrances incurred during the marriage, and that you will indemnify and hold me harmless from any financial fallout associated with those debts. That includes your business lines of credit, your equipment loans, and any private financial arrangements you've made. I looked at Evelyn as I said the words asterisk private financial arrangements asterisk. She didn't blink. She was too arrogant, too convinced of her own superior intelligence to understand what a hold harmless clause actually meant when applied to a forged deed and a massive, undisclosed mortgage on her own home. She just saw that I was waiving my claim to Garrett's failing business, which she believed was the only thing holding them back. Well, that seems standard, Evelyn said, her voice dismissive. Garrett's business is his own. He's a man. He can handle his own affairs. Sign it, Garrett. Let's get this over with so Chloe can rest. Wait, Annie. Chloe piped up from the sofa, her voice whining. Are you sure you aren't going to try to take my baby registry items? Or the crib we ordered? I looked at my sister. The sister I had clothed. The sister whose tears I had dried. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of grief. A physical ache in my chest for the little girl I had raised, replaced now by this cold, greedy stranger who was willing to steal my home and my husband without a single shred of remorse. You can keep the crib, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You can keep everything you've taken. Garrett took the blue ballpoint pen from Mira's hand. His fingers were slightly damp, leaving a faint smudge on the white legal paper. He didn't read page 12. He didn't read the fine print about the indemnification. He was too eager to sign away his marriage, too impatient to secure his legacy with my sister, and too confident that his forgery had already secured him the house. With a quick, sloppy scribble, he signed his name on the line marked *husband*. Mira stepped forward, her face expressionless. She took the document, verified Garrett's identification a mere formality. But Mira was thorough and pressed her heavy metal notary seal down onto the paper. The sharp asterisk clack, dash, clack asterisk of the metal seal echoed through the quiet room like a gavel falling in a courtroom. "It's done," Mira said, her voice dry and steady. I took my copy of the agreement and carefully placed it back into the green ledger folder. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. "Thank you, Garrett," I said, looking down at him one last time. "You've given me exactly what I deserved." They smiled, all three of them, a collective sigh of relief washing over the room as they watched me walk toward the door. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully stolen my grandfather's house, cleared Garrett's business debts, and ushered me out into the cold with nothing but 3 cardboard boxers and a broken heart. They had no idea that the very paper Garrett had just signed was a legal lock on his own destruction, and that the key was already turning in the lock. 3 weeks is a long time when you are waiting for the world to turn, but it is a heartbeat when you are watching a trap snap shut. I spent those 21 days in Clara's guest room, sleeping under my grandfather's patchwork quilt. Every morning, I woke up to the smell of her percolator coffee and the soft, steady hum of the Ohio River just beyond the trees. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look at social media. I didn't drive past the house on Riverview Lane. I just worked my shifts in the courthouse basement, pulling dusty land files, checking tax assessments, and letting the quiet of the old papers heal the raw, open wounds in my chest. Then, Tuesday arrived. It was my 38th birthday. There were no balloons, no big parties, and no expensive gifts. Just Clara sitting across from me at her small kitchen table, pushing a small pear tart with a single, flickering yellow candle toward me. "Make a wish, Annie," she said softly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. I didn't need to wish. The gift I had been waiting for was already waiting for me in a blue folder on Clara's sideboard. At exactly 9 o'clock that morning, the Spendthrift Trust my grandfather had established 20 years ago officially expired. By operation of law, the administrative hold on 142 Riverview Lane dissolved, and the title vested solely and completely in my name. At 10 o'clock, the judge signed our dissolution decree. Because Garrett had signed the agreement waiving all claims to my inherited property and assuming all marital liabilities, the judge entered the order without a single question. Garrett hadn't even hired a lawyer to look it over. He was so eager to get me out of his way, so desperate to clear his name of the marriage so he could play the proud father to Chloe's triplets, that he had practically ran to the courthouse to file the signed papers. I know some of you sitting at your own kitchen tables right now might think I was being cruel by letting him walk into this blind. You might think a sister, even a betrayed one, should have warned him. But let me ask you this. When someone holds a match to your house while you are sleeping inside, do you owe them a warning when the wind shifts and blows the smoke back into their own lungs? No. You walk out, you keep your head high, and you let the fire do what fire does. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I drove over to 142 Riverview Lane. I didn't go alone. Clara sat in the passenger seat, and Bain Duas, in a white county cruiser, was Deputy Miller. He was a quiet, thick-shouldered man who had gone to high school with Garrett and knew exactly what kind of lazy, corner-cutting hand Garrett played in life. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, I saw Evelyn's silver sedan parked near the garage. Through the front window, I could see the silhouette of my sister, Chloe, pacing back and forth, her hand on her stomach, her face tight with the stress she so frequently complained about. I unlocked the front door with my own key. The brass handle felt cold in my palm, a stark contrast to the humid Ohio afternoon. When the door swung open, the creak of the floorboards alerted them. Evelyn emerged from the kitchen, holding a cup of tea. When she saw me standing there, flanked by Clara and a uniformed deputy, her smug hostess smile froze on her face. "Annette," Evelyn said, her voice dropping its warm veneer, turning instantly sharp. "What is the meaning of this? And why is there a police officer in our entryway?" Chloe is in a very delicate state. This kind of disruption is entirely unacceptable. "It's not your entry, Evelyn," I said, my voice quiet, carrying the steady weight of a woman who knew exactly where she stood. And the deputy is here to ensure that the transition of property goes smoothly. Before Evelyn could reply, the back door banged open. Garrett walked into the kitchen, wearing his grass-stained work boots and carrying a yellow folder of his own. He was grinning, his face flushed with a triumphant, arrogant energy. He held the folder up like a trophy. "It's done," Garrett called out. Not seeing me or the deputy yet, the clerk just handed me the certified decree. "We're free, Mom!" The divorce is final, and the house is— He stopped dead in his tracks as he rounded the corner into the living room. His eyes darted from me to Clara and then to Deputy Miller, whose hand was resting casually on his utility belt. "Annette," Garrett stammered, his grin evaporating. "What are you doing here? I told you, you need to call before you come by. We have the legal right to this place now. The divorce is finalized. I have the signed decree, right here." Evelyn stepped closer to her son, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the heavy blue folder Clara was holding. She had spent her entire life lording her superior social standing over the working-class folks in this town, but she wasn't stupid. She knew that Clara didn't show up with a deputy for a simple social call. "Garrett," Evelyn said, her voice suddenly tight, a thin thread of panic vibrating beneath her words. "Did you verify the deed transfer with the county recorder's office this morning, like we planned?" I didn't need to," Garrett said, his confidence wavering as he looked at my calm, unblinking face. "The quitclaim deed was filed 3 months ago. The notary in Columbus took care of it. Annette signed it. It's a done deal. We're going to list the house next week to clear the business lines." Clara let out a short, dry laugh from behind me. It was the sound of a woman who had spent 40 years watching arrogant men make fools of themselves on public record. Evelyn's face drained of color. The smug, patrician mask she had worn for 13 years cracked, revealing a hollow, terrified old woman. She looked at the blue folder in Clara's hands, then at the certified letters she had left sitting unopened on the kitchen counter. Letters she had ignored because she thought they were just standard administrative notices. She went entirely pale, her skin turning the color of wet river silt. "Wait," Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking as she turned to her son, her hand clutching his arm so hard her knuckles turned white. "She didn't tell you." Garrett frowned, looking between his mother and me, his chest puffing out in a pathetic attempt to maintain control. "Tell me what? Mom, what are you talking about?" She signed the dissolution. She waived the landscaping business. She let us have the house. "No, Garrett," I said, stepping forward. I placed my hands flat on my grandfather's oak table, feeling the solid, honest wood beneath my fingers. "I didn't let you have anything. I let you sign your own financial death warrant." I opened the blue folder. I pulled out the certified copy of the deed to 142 Riverview Lane, bearing the fresh gold seal of the Washington County Recorder, dated that very morning. 3 months ago, you forged my signature on a quitclaim deed to steal this house," I said, my voice rising slightly, filling the quiet room with the cold, hard truth. "But you didn't know that my grandfather's will placed this property in a spendthrift trust until my 38th birthday. Any attempt to transfer, sell, or encumber this house before today was void from the moment you touched the paper. The county recorder put a fraud hold on your filing the day you submitted it." Garrett's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had stepped off a cliff and was waiting to hit the ground. "And 3 weeks ago," I continued, pointing to page 12 of the dissolution agreement he had so eagerly signed, "you signed a legally binding, notarized settlement in which you explicitly acknowledged that 142 Riverview Lane is my sole, non-marital, inherited property. You waived any and all current, past, or future claims of ownership or residency in this house." But the notary," Garrett whispered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. The Columbus notary accepted a forged signature." "Garrett," Clara chimed in, her voice sharp as a razor, "which is a third-degree felony in the state of Ohio. We have the handwriting analysis, and Mira has already submitted the official fraud report to the county prosecutor." The only reason the deputy isn't putting handcuffs on you right now is because Annette agreed to let you walk out of here today instead of leaving in the back of a cruiser. Chloe came out of the living room, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at Garrett. Garrett? What does this mean? Where are we going to live? The babies. The nursery. There is no nursery here, Chloe, I said, looking at my sister. The sister I had protected. The sister who had taken my husband and tried to take my home. I felt a sudden, profound wave of pity for her, but no regrets. You have 24 hours to pack your things and get out of my house. Annette? Please. Evelyn cried out, her voice losing all of its dignity, turning into a desperate, high-pitched plea. You can't do this. My house. My Victorian. I mortgaged it to the hilt to fund Garrett's business. We were going to sell this house to pay off the bank. If we can't sell this place, the bank is going to foreclose on my home. We'll lose everything. I looked at Evelyn, remembering the way she had sat at this very table 3 weeks ago, telling me that a man has a right to his legacy, and that I was nothing but a dry well. You should have read the fine print, Evelyn, I said quietly. In Section 14 of the agreement Garrett signed, he assumed sole responsibility for all marital liabilities, including any undisclosed debts or encumbrances associated with family properties. He legally indemnified me. The $80,000 business debt, the tax liens, the mortgage on your Victorian ET is all entirely yours. You wanted his legacy, Evelyn. Now you have it. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Garrett looked down at the yellow folder in his hands. The certified divorce decree, he had thought, was his golden ticket to a new, wealthy life. It was nothing but a mirror reflecting his own greed, his own cowardice, and his own ruin. He had spent 13 years treating me like a quiet, invisible convenience, never realizing that the quietest water is often the deepest and the most dangerous to cross. This silence that followed my words was a physical thing, heavy and cold, pressing down on the room until the air felt too thick to breathe. For 13 years, I had been the quiet one. I was the wife who swallowed her sighs, the sister who quietly paid the bills, the daughter-in-law who took the subtle digs and the overt cruelty with a bowed head because I thought peace was something you could buy if you just sacrificed enough of yourself. But peace isn't bought, it's reclaimed. Deputy Miller stood by the door, his boots making a slight, rhythmic creak against the floorboards as he shifted his weight. He didn't say a word, but his presence was a wall of state-sanctioned reality that Evelyn and Garrett couldn't look past. It took them 3 hours to pack. I didn't watch them. I sat at my grandfather's oak table, my hands resting flat on the cool wood, while Clara sat beside me, occasionally reaching out to pat my arm with her dry, wrinkled hand. From the hallway, I heard the sounds of their sudden, chaotic departure, Garrett's heavy, angry stomping as he dragged suitcases down the stairs. Chloe's soft, theatrical whimpering, punctuated by the sharp, desperate whispers of Evelyn trying to direct a retreat that had no safe harbor. When Chloe walked past the dining room, she stopped. She was holding a plastic laundry basket filled with her cheap makeup palettes, her designer knockoff purses, and one of my old, oversized knit cardigans. Her face was red, her eyes swollen. She looked at me, waiting for the older sister she had spent her life manipulating to step forward, to offer a compromise, to tell her that family was thicker than paper. I met her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at her, seeing the little girl I had raised, and the selfish woman she had chosen to become. The silence between us was an ocean. After a long, agonizing moment, Chloe swallowed hard, turned her head, and walked out the front door. When the screen door finally clicked shut for the last time, the quiet that settled over 142 Riverview Lane was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating hush of a house waiting for a child that would never come. It was the clean, empty quiet of a blank ledger page waiting for the first line of ink. The financial collapse of the Sterling family legacy didn't happen in a single, dramatic flash. It happened slowly, systematically, recorded page by page in the public files of the Washington County Courthouse where I worked. Over the next 6 months, my daily routine returned to a quiet rhythm, but my view of the world had changed. Every now and then, a document would cross my desk that told the story of their undoing. First came the official foreclosure notice on Evelyn's grand Victorian home. Because Garrett's landscaping business had defaulted on its primary lines of credit, the bank moved quickly. The big, beautiful house, with its polished mahogany trim and manicured lawn, the house Evelyn had used to lord her status over the entire county, was auctioned off on the courthouse steps on a gray Tuesday in November. Evelyn moved into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner's on the edge of town, her pride reduced to a small concrete balcony overlooking an alley. Then came Garrett's bankruptcy filings. The hold harmless clause he had signed in our dissolution agreement was ironclad. When the equipment suppliers and the tax authorities came knocking, he had no shield. He had to sell his commercial mowers, his trucks, and the very trailer he had used to build his identity as a successful local businessman. He ended up taking a job as a hired hand for a rival excavation company, digging trenches in the cold Ohio mud for $20 an hour, his hands calloused and his back aching under the weight of a debt he would never fully pay off. And then, there were the babies. Chloe gave birth to the triplets in January, 2 boys and a girl, born 6 weeks early, at the county hospital. If you have ever spent a decade praying for a child, only to watch the person who betrayed you receive that exact blessing in abundance, you know the strange, hollow ache that settles in your chest. It is a pain that doesn't quite go away, but it changes. It softens around the edges. I didn't hate those babies. They were innocent, completely unaware of the web of greed and deceit that had ushered them into the world. But I knew I could never be their aunt in the way Chloe had probably imagined when she was spinning her fantasies of a big, happy family built on my ruin. The only time I saw them was in the spring, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at the local grocery store. I was standing in the aisle, comparing the prices of local honey, when I heard the unmistakable, chaotic sound of multiple babies crying. I turned, and there was Chloe. She looked 37. Not 27. Her hair, once carefully bleached and styled, was pulled back in a messy, greasy bun. Dark circles hung like bruised crescent moons under her eyes. She was pushing a massive double stroller while carrying the third baby in a worn fabric sling against her chest. She was trying to reach a can of infant formula on the top shelf, her arms shaking, her face flushed with a mixture of exhaustion and embarrassment as people in the aisle stared at the spectacle. I stood there for a long moment, my hand resting on the metal shopping cart. My heart didn't leap with joy at her struggle. There was no triumph in seeing my sister broken by the reality of the life she had stolen. There was only a profound, quiet sadness for the waste of it all. I walked over to her. Chloe froze when she saw my boots stop next to her stroller. She slowly looked up, her eyes wide with a sudden, defensive panic. She pulled the baby in the sling closer to her chest, as if she expected me to strike her, or worse, to mock her. "Let me help you," I said quietly. I reached up my long arms, easily reaching the top shelf, and pulled down 3 cans of the expensive formula she was struggling to reach. I placed them gently in the bottom basket of her stroller. Chloe stared at the cans, and then she looked at me. A single, heavy tear escaped her eye, tracing a clean path through the dust and dried baby's spit up on her cheek. "Annie," she whispered, her voice cracking, carrying the raw, desperate edge of a woman who hadn't slept a full night in months. I'm so sorry. Garrett, he doesn't help. He's always working or drinking, and Evelyn just sits in her apartment and blames me for losing the Victorian. I'm so tired, Annie. I'm so tired." She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling, reaching for the sleeve of my coat. It was the same gesture she had used when she was 8 years old, crying because she had scraped her knee on the gravel driveway of our rented house. For a fraction of a second, the old pattern pulled at me. The instinct to scoop her up, to take her burdens onto my own shoulders, to bring her back to the yellow room and tell her that her big sister would fix everything. But I looked at the babies in the stroller. I looked at the face of the sister who had sat at my grandfather's table and tried to steal my home while carrying my husband's children. I gently stepped back, just enough so her hand fell short of my sleeve. "I know you are, Chloe," I said, my voice soft but firm, a line drawn in the dirt between us that could never be crossed again. "But you chose this life. You have to live it." I pulled a $50 bill from my purse and slipped it into the diaper bag hanging from the stroller handle. Buy them some extra wipes. Take care of yourself. I turned my cart around and walked toward the checkout lanes. I didn't look back. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, and it never would be. The trust was gone, burned down to the ash. But in that moment, I realized that holding on to anger was just another way of letting them occupy space in my head. By letting the anger go, I was finally, truly free of them. Now, it is summer again. The Ohio River is a deep, peaceful blue, reflecting the willow trees that line the banks. I sit on the back porch of 142 Riverview Lane, watching the fireflies begin to blink in the tall grass near the water. The house has been restored. I sanded down the dining table myself, spending hours in the quiet afternoon heat, applying layer after layer of clear, protective varnish until the wood gleamed with a deep, honest warmth. Clara is inside, her small, bent figure visible through the kitchen window as she pours 2 glasses of iced sweet tea. We don't talk about Garrett or Evelyn anymore. Their names have faded from our vocabulary, replaced by discussions about the county archive project, the heirloom tomatoes we planted in the garden, and the quiet, simple beauty of a life lived on our own terms. I know some of you are sitting at your own kitchen tables right now, staring at a stack of bills, or a legal document, or a text message that feels like a knife in your heart. You might be feeling the suffocating weight of a betrayal from the very people who were supposed to love you and protect you. You might think that because you are quiet, because you have spent your life sacrificing for others, that you don't have the strength to fight back. But let me tell you this. Quiet strength is the most resilient kind there is. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to burn the world down to find your place in it. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply look at the fine print, gather your papers, and wait for the wind to shift. Because in the end, love is not a transaction. It is not a line item in a budget, and it is certainly not something that can be stolen or forged. It is a gift we give to ourselves when we finally decide that we are worthy of our own protection. I take a sip of my cold tea as Clara joins me on the porch. The creak of her wicker chair, a familiar, comforting song in the evening air. The sun sinks below the tree line, painting the Ohio sky in shades of gold and violet. The house behind me is quiet, but for the first time in my 38 years, that quiet doesn't feel like an empty space. It feels like home.